Bipartisan task force of state lawmakers held a public hearing in the Titletown district on the use of artificial intelligence.
This is the state assembly prepares to vote on legislation as early as next year, which could place restrictions on the use of AI and create more oversight. Jason Zimmerman was at today's hearing. He's live in Ashwaubenon with the First Alert update. Jason.
The hearing, which is held at Titletown Tech, was a chance for business leaders and members of the community to provide feedback. Many companies are already using artificial intelligence, and some issues have come up which lawmakers say they intend to address. While protecting people's privacy is the #1 concern when it comes to artificial intelligence, lawmakers say it goes much deeper, as the state has dealt with criminal activity using AI to generate child porn and even scam people using the identity of a trusted authority figure.
A lot of politicians are kind of fearful that as we do interviews like this, they can take these clips, take our voices, and manipulate it so it makes us say something that actually wasn't said by us that obviously could hurt the reputation of not only ourselves, but any average person that may have some sort of stature.
The goal for the task force is to examine the use of various AI tools. This includes automated decision-making methods, facial recognition, and generative AI. Representative Lori Palmieri also has concerns about the technology being deployed responsibly and ethically.
Things like bias and discrimination and some of the unintended consequences that can come from the efficiencies that were originally intended, and of course, concerns about guardrails for bad actors.
Among those who spoke was Brown County Executive Troy Streckenbach, who urged lawmakers to make a bigger investment in high-speed internet, which is necessary for access to AI programs.
According to the federal government, all of Brown County has high-speed internet. I would ask you to visit the town of Morrison and ask them on election night how great their internet is.
2 more public hearings are scheduled in the weeks to come at UW-Stout and in Madison. The governor has also created a task force on AI to examine its usage in the workplace. Reporting live in Ashwaubenon, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.